Okay, so everybody, it's been recorded from now. And before I introduce this evening's guest, just a reminder on a few upcoming registered talks. The next one in this series is on the 25th, and it's the rescheduled lecture by Leslie Loco. And then she'll be followed on the 6th of March. Mute. Elliot, I think, needs to mute. Um, and that will be followed on the 6th of March by Mary Duggan. And on the 3rd of March by Mary Duggan in the evening. And then on the morning of the 10th of March by the curator, Kate Goodwin, who'll be joining us from Australia live. So that talk's going to be at 9 a.m. on that Wednesday. And then following that, we're going to be joined by a number of others who are confirming their times, including the landscape architects and historians. Anyway, so much for that. I'll be advising you about those as they come out. And then on to tonight's guest, who joins us from Switzerland, from Lillit Bollinger's own atelier, from her own office. And we're very much looking forward to this talk. Lillit was educated in the ETH. She set up her own practice about 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and has been making this really rather wonderful work, which builds itself up in layers spatially and is very playful formally, but seems to connect in a very deep way with some of the challenges of contemporary tectonics and the potentials for joy that lie in that. So I'm going to hand over to Lillit now, and very much looking forward to the talk. Lillit, thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to invite me and to have this lecture. Well, now I try to. Do you see
yeah, that's
the first picture?
Now.
Full screen?
Yeah, first
okay.
Screen. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first I have to apologize for my English, who is not that good. I especially will have problems to understand your questions at the end, but I really try to do my best. I would like to share with you 3 of my build projects with a lot of pictures and plans. Let's start. The process always means entering the unknown. You have to be prepared for that. The foggy picture also stands for the intuitive part, which is more difficult to put into words. It stands for flying blind, which makes it possible to perceive things differently. So the first project is a conversion from 2016 in a small village called Obstalden. The street is an important social place for this neighborhood. People meet every evening without rain to talk to each other. And Obstalden is located in a small village far above Lake Wahlen, somewhere in the middle of Switzerland, in the foothills of the Alps. The clients Michi and Evelyn had lived in Chile for 4 years and decided to come back to Switzerland with 2 children. They had bought a small house from their grandparents, which was the family's holiday home. We got to know each other in Chile and both brought back common ideas of architecture from this country. For example, the culture of the self-built houses of the people there, like this great little holiday house in Huasco. It looks handcrafted and fragile, but lovingly composed. This culture ranges from the huts of the Mapuche to the Ciudad Abierto of the Valparaiso School of Architecture, where students have been constructing their own buildings on the school grounds since the 1970s. The clients had come to appreciate this culture there. So, being a holiday home, there were far too many rooms. The condition was not so good, unsightly, cold, badly aligned, and converted into a holiday home by the grandparents themselves in the 80s. But the budget was small and the cottage still had meaning for these families' reasons. It was clear that it could only be converted and that demolition and new construction were out of the question. On all family photos, I saw that the grandparents had bought a barn in the 80s, and I realized that the barn was the actual DNA of the building. So not much more than a light supporting structure and a thin shell. It also meant that the room heights did not fit to make it a two-story dwelling. However, the roof trusses were sized to span large expanses. The old barn, however, had a lot of charm. In addition, one can see that there was an original large barn door, which was removed in the first rebuilding. That was the way it looked inside. There were no beautiful materials to find inside, no good craftsmanship. So I suggested the following concept to the owners. With the opening of the old barn door here, maybe you see that, re-establish the connection to the street facing south to bring light and warmth into the house. Clear out the whole ground floor and put the core in the middle. Open the walls over against the valley on this side and put a window box in front of the facade. This is the ground plan for the building application. You can see in yellow the walls which have been torn out, for example here, here, and here. And in red, what has been added. Here you can see what is happening to the facade. The old barn door that was reopened, and on the valley side, the big window. I think it is exciting to see surfaces age, to see the traces of time connects me with what was there before. A building appears more natural if not everything has been made new, and new is always next to old. In this way, the history of the place continues to be written. Time becomes perceptible like a fabric, and the current extension is also integrated into a whole. By overlaying the various interventions, their radicality disappears. Thus, the upper silver grey wooden slats of the existing building are not refreshed. The owners will have to do this perhaps in 10 years. The old random window openings happen to create a very exciting facade layout. So actually only existing openings were put back in relation to each other. A two-part wooden shutter should be able to close the high window in snow and sun. In practice, however, this was not easy to implement because the space between the wall and the envelope was tight. In addition, the shutter was to disappear into the plane of the facade when not in use. This is what the facade looked like in the end. Inside, the window shows the recesses of the original stories and becomes a three-dimensional object. Here is the view towards the panorama, and there are several levels of perception at the same time. The panorama at the back, the new window box, the old truss, which shows traces of the first reconstruction, and the radiator in the front. The ground floor appears as a single large space that nevertheless forms zones. All the new furniture and interventions lie in a contained band along the walls. Cupboards, kitchen here, work tables, sideboards, benches, and the windows. By setting a round core, an interior is created where I experience the space anew from every position again and again. Visual references are created, space condenses and opens up again. A curved sliding door opens and closes the bathroom. It can be part of the living space while bathing, or it can be closed off. There are color rules for the wood. The materials used are sea pine boards for walls, ceiling and floor, and spruce three-layer boards for furniture. The sea pine is painted raw or colorless. The spruce wood is stained dark green on the inside and painted black on the exterior facade. Old wood remains untreated. The wood is rough. The stained surfaces have a great depth of color and change in the play of light. The dark color helps to feel anchored and comfortable in the house. So the next two projects are both located in the same village, in a hilly landscape in the north of Switzerland. The small village is called Nuglar and lies on a hilltop in the middle of a traditional landscape of fruit trees. The two projects do not belong together, but have the same origin and stand next to each other. In this village, there was a family business, a cherry and wine producer, a distillery, which liquidated the business in the 80s, in the third generation. The buildings had been empty for many years. 10 years ago, the family finally agreed and put all their buildings and land up for sale. But the industrial buildings were difficult to sell. All projects failed. If you look at an aerial photograph taken in 1969, you can see how the village was embedded in fields with trees, mainly cherry trees. At that time, about 20,000. This was an important source of income for the village, so the distillery was also very important for the village. This map clearly shows the special plot structure with the long, narrow plots, especially for the fruit trees all around the village. Three big buildings stood in the middle of the village. The distillery itself, here, which already 50 years ago found a new buyer as a piece of filet and is now run as a restaurant and brewery. And as well as two warehouses from 1956, this one, and 68 on the left side, this one. All three buildings were connected via squares, goods lifts, and the underground corridor here. The building on the left was a warehouse, a grocery store, and served as a collection point for the cherry deliveries in summer. We call it Kirschlager, which means something like warehouse for cherries. This building was discovered by my partner Daniel Buchner, himself architect at Buchner Bründler, and me, because we were looking for an industrial building to live and work in. And we ended up buying the Kirschlager. So here is the Kirschlager project, which was completed in summer 2018. And naturally, it was a collaboration between Buchner Bründler Architects and Lillit Bollinger Studio. This is what the building looked like, with the underground access to the second basement level. This door, and it's mainly a concrete block. Inside, the ground floor was divided into two parts. There was a large garage and a former grocery store. This is what we see here. And in the background, you can see the window parapets at a height of about 2 meter 50, and a dropped ceiling. This is the view from the street. The concrete building, unfortunately painted white, a clumsy volume, rather the expression of a garage. Originally, the building looked like this, especially the shop window on the left, what you see here, was quite elegant. Unfortunately, it was unattractively refurbished after an explosion of the oil heating system 10 years ago. That's now. We replaced the shop window and put a small superstructure on the roof that helped the volume a bit. At the beginning, we started with planning and concepts. It was a matter of figuring out how we wanted to deal with the space, how we could light and divide the large space without losing the generosity, or how we could connect the two almost separate parts of the building. What openings do we need? We imagined the opening in the partition wall to be round. It gives the feeling that you have to go through the opening and step over a threshold. The question was, how do we want to move in this space? What sense of space was important for us? With that picture by Sascha Weidner, one can explain movement in three-dimensional space quite well. Moving in space is a physical experience. My body moves, my eyes see, and my hands touch. This is the ground floor plan for the building application. You can clearly see the division of the building into two parts, this wall here. With this strong wall, and on the left, the stepped store part attached to the distillery here, and the garage with a separate room here. The main measures were to open up the walls, roof and facade in order to get light and transparency and to better connect rooms. Now the space consists of three parts. The studio here, the living space, this one, and the garage and workshop, this one. During the demolition, under the lowered ceiling of the former store, a wooden beam ceiling emerged. This was amazing because we first thought that the building was purely concrete, and we had to adjust our planning a little bit. But we liked the new reddish color and the relief of the ceiling. We had many openings drilled and cut out. It is sometimes statically simpler and technically much easier to drill than to cut an angular opening. But on the valley facade, the high windows were cut down to a parapet height of 50 centimeters. Afterwards, a large steel window box was mounted on the facade from the outside. Here you can see the window in section. The upper part of the window can be pushed open manually with gas springs. Also, the windows are quite heavy. We developed the details ourselves and had the windows built and assembled by a locksmith. Here the window is currently lying on the floor in the locksmith shop and is being discussed. Now, if the windows are open, that's what it looks like. In the floor plan, you can see two entrances because of the division. One here and one here. On the left to the studio and on the right side to the living space, as well as the spatial zones that are created. The studio is only visually separated by room furniture. We call these things we call room furniture, not acoustically. The room furniture includes a guest room here, closet space, toilet, and bathtub. Openings can be visually closed with huge doors, for example here, or this one, or this one. These look more like folding walls. The living spaces are connected as a continuum along the facade with living room, here, kitchen, dining to sleeping, bathroom, and entrance here. Niches and narrow passages are created. In the sectional view, you can see how the room furniture does not close off the room towards the ceiling. It is merely set into it. Here. Here in the studio, looking towards the living room, the doors are not closed. The garage has many openings, but otherwise remains as it is. An unheated room that serves as a workshop in summer, and that is the heart of the house. The actual apartment entrance leads over the garage. It is the circular opening. On the right, you can see the old goods lift. In the apartment inside, there is a huge wooden door which is open in summer and closed in winter. The black circle is a seal because the existing wall is crooked. These doors were developed and built together with the carpenter. This is a picture of the studio with the raw materials. The old partition wall in the back, and on the left, the room furniture. The back of the guest room in concrete, this one here. On the right, the new window in green, which is also a functional sideboard, and from the outside, a bench to sit on. The green highlights the contrast to the woody, rather reddish ceiling. Here the doors to the flat are open and everything is connected. And the view from the flat towards the studio. On the right, the concrete cylinder with the bathtub. The position of the room's furniture creates narrowness and expanse, like a labyrinth space becomes a physical experience. I call it hiding in corners. This has a poetic component, as shown here in a photograph by Francesca Woodman. The opening connecting the studio and the living space is placed in such a way that the only delicate support that carries the entire weight of the ceiling is in front of it. This is how the meaning of this support is referred to, like a little troublemaker, it stands in my way. All this woodwork was mainly built by the carpenters on site. Here in discussion. The doors are at the same time very simple and highly precise in detailing. The concrete works are also cast directly on site and in their way correspond more to objects with which we explore what one can do with a technique, for example, how thin concrete can be casted. It is moving between precisely planned objects and spontaneous processes on the building site. The choice of materials is based on the existing building. Old and new concrete stand side by side. The boundaries sometimes blur and both stage themselves in this way. What is added as a further intervention is clearly shown. The old is not glossed over or reworked. In this way, an overall picture is created. Now to the last project, the residential studio house called the Old Wine Warehouse, das alte Weinlager. This is the former wine warehouse in 2016, a huge building. On the street facade, there was a painted mural with the lettering of the distillery. An industrial agricultural building, a huge volume with a footprint of 600 square meters. I thought it would be great to develop a project with this building and asked the owner of a large timber construction company if he would possibly partner with me on this project. The building had some fascinating places to offer, such as a delivery ramp under a large roof. It had a huge basement with these mushroom pillars, which looked as if they had been calculated for heavy loads. Unfortunately, the building law of Nuglar says that a maximum of one two-family house can be built per plot. The area had been rezoned for two-story housing. The municipality's building authority also clearly stated that the building had to be demolished because the utilization of the plot was too high. But at a size of 2,100 square meters, the plot was large enough to apply for an exemption permit as part of an area development. In this case, the only criterion is whether the development is good from an architectural and residential point of view and whether it is keeping with the architectural and landscape surroundings. The exception provided that the base story would be preserved and a new smaller volume would be placed on top of the existing base, all under the same roof as before, which would result in the creation of an immensely large covered outdoor space. As a further exception, the base story is interpreted as existing topography, so that a building with the height for two-story living can be placed on the base. Another exception requested was to build a building for 6 parties instead of 2. We got the approval for the exceptions and the Hürzler Holzbau bought the land with the warehouse. I started to develop the project together with them as a total contractor and we began to look for buyers. Then the planning and construction process started. The question was, what can I keep? This is the north facade to the street with the old mural. Since you had to build a railing anyway, I wanted to leave the old walls as a parapet and also like to have the old mural facing the street, like a Western facade. Actually, original site-specific art, which in turn becomes again art on the building. I found a master builder who was willing to get involved in these demolition experiments. A kind of noble demolition followed with an uncertain outcome. But it actually worked, and the old basement plinths stood ready to house a new building as ground zero. Wall remnants were left standing, forming a kind of shell on which the new building will be erected. This is a picture of the finished building. The surroundings are untreated. Old things are visible patched up, such as the garage doors. The old wall has not been washed down and bears the patina of the last 50 years. The flooring clearly shows where the new pipes have been installed. This leads to a simultaneity of new and old. Surfaces with and without patina stand next to each other. The residents themselves must take possession of the environment and shape it. Access still leads via the old ramp to an inner semi-private zone under the roof. The topography of the plot is not changed. The old paths, which are still used by the villagers, continue to lead over the area. Seen from the flat, an exciting filter layer with the views in and out is created. Actually, it's like an urban living. Here you can see the floor plan of the new building. Within the old walls, a new building is being constructed with 6 residential units. The 7th on the right side. In the southern area is a shared outdoor kitchen. This one here. By reducing the volume, a covered outdoor area is created around the house. Here, all around. A kind of access balcony through which access to the 6 houses is provided. So if you follow this path here. There is no cellar exit in the units, so the communal parts are used even more intensively. There is a basic extension, the minimum, with kitchen, bath and toilet on the ground floor and a staircase leading to another floor. Is this furniture, for example? A narrow passage between old and new is created on the north facade. That creates an exciting intermediate space between the walls. In some places high and protected, but also free and wide, and always under the cantilevered roof. The outdoor kitchen is the heart of the community. Facing south, sun from morning to evening, and yet shade in summer, an immensely high space of 9 meters height with access to the garden. The existing basement was extended quite pragmatically. It is unheated. You can see the grid of the pillars on which the big partition walls stand. This one here. In addition to the necessary rooms for heating and laundry, there is a large garage and above all, a lot of free space for the residents' future projects. For fire protection reasons, it was necessary to make a second exit into the garden. The necessity became a virtue because this entrance with the semicircular wall opening was created. The building actually consists mainly of 8 huge prefabricated walls, which are formed as a disc standing on the existing pillars. For example, this one here. This grid gives the width of the apartment inside of 4.40 meters and a length of 14 meters. All other timber construction and carpentry work was carried out on site. The east and west facade is a timber frame structure which is needed to reinforce the big walls. 2 frames stand on top of each other and rhythmize the facade. I have been searching for a while to find a way to build a glass facade that does not give the impression of an office facade. And the timber frame is a rather rural structure, but implemented on a larger scale. With the coloring, the individual parts are structurally differentiated and the facade appears more filigree. This is the detail of the support that carries the canopy. It was quite a process to develop it together with the engineer. It was difficult to push the support point for the roof load out of the wall, but I really wanted to make this point visible and separate it from the frame. And the steel junction can act as a joint to absorb and distribute the forces of the roof. The photograph this photograph by Sascha Weidner represents the term layer. You can see a water surface with a reflection of the surroundings, for example, palm trees. You can also see a withered leaf on the water surface and others that have sunk to the bottom. You see the bottom of the pool with a plate pattern, and you can also see a floor drain in the foreground. These different layers together form a work of art. So layer refers to a design strategy of layering and superimposing, from which something new can emerge. And it is less about transparency as it is about layering and ambiguity. It is a strategy in design, but it also denotes an attitude towards what has been found and towards the environment, towards the existing building in the rebuilding process. This principle can also be seen in the facade, from the window level with the view over the level of the timber frame, which functions as a visual filter between the inside and the outside, to the level of the white roof girder with the yellow note, which also separates the individual units from each other. An additional optical line is created by an ornamental element, which acts as a horizon line and sets the own body size to the scale of the building height. Another filter is the old outer wall, which is positioned as a further level between inside and outside. Another detail is the ceiling supports. Each house is modular and has steel angles in the walls with perforations, where the beam layer for the ceilings of 2 floors can be laid. 5 of these beams are statically relevant, all others can be removed or added easily. As a floor slab consists only of the beam layer and the 27 mm 3-layer board on top of it. Most of the construction is made of these 3-layer spruce boards. Here you can see that the beams are only fixed to the steel angle with 1 screw. Everything else is then placed on or hung from the beams. This system makes it very easy to continue building. The section shows that the flat is mainly a high space under a big roof. And with each party, the project was individually developed and in some cases additionally extended. In this type of house, with the ground floor on the left and the first floor and the attic floor, a longitudinal gallery was built here with a working zone on the first floor and an attic also with a longitudinal gallery. This one is the simplest extension. There are no closed rooms. Even the story surfaces were separated from the walls and placed as a body in the volume. This allows the feeling of hanging in the middle of the room, like in a bird's nest. Another client wanted a cross gallery and closed rooms, as well as a second toilet on the upper floor. So if you go up and come to the first floor, you have here a closed room, closed sleeping room, and can go up again to the attic. This is the gallery. Here is the ground floor with a bright green extension with the gallery and the open ceiling here. The actual bathroom is a suspended light white construction made of the spruce panels, leaving a gap open to the bathtub. So when I'm lying in the bathtub, I can see out through the gap. When I'm standing and taking a shower, you can see my knees from the outside. That's the plan of the bathroom. With the door opening 180 degrees, I can close the toilet behind the kitchen here, or close the bathroom, or park the door in the toilet. Finally, a last exterior picture with the last additional element, the exterior curtains. This adds another aspect, something anarchic, because the curtains are constantly moving and contrast the strictness and the rhythm of the grid with something soft, moving, dancing, and unformed. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lilith. That was beautiful, and, incredibly beautifully described as well, may I say, for all of your concern at the start about your English. That was one of the more eloquent lectures we've had, so I don't think you need to worry about your English. I love this.
You're very kind.
I not know. Those who know me will know I'm not particularly kind as such. No, I think I'm being honest. I think it's very thoughtful work, incredibly astutely judged and carefully understood at every stage, which is just very rare, actually. And I love this kind of stewardship that's sort of happening in it, and that you're sort of minding the meaning in every joint, in every attitude, and there's a building up from this tectonic to a very sophisticated idea about layering as being a very contemporary way to understand how to act and how to make new work in sympathy with old. But I think what was very beautiful about that is that layering can also include social aspects or human stories as well as architectural, physical elements, which I think is very beautifully expressed in all of the projects. These, in the first one, the memory of both Chile and the barn's previous use, and in the middle one, yourself and your partner making something together. And then in this most recent one, something very beautiful, which is a self-initiated project where you work with another developer or builder, and then you're working with the people who eventually buy these apartments to tailor it to their need, which is just, again, extremely rare and really lovely to see that it's possible, actually. And this is not really a question so much as a kind of a summation of the things I enjoyed. I really loved that image at the start of the fog, and you saying that somehow when you're flying blind, you can see things more clearly. And I understand what you mean by that, which is the feeling of trusting yourself to get through a process, even though the destination is completely unclear and opaque. And I'm just wondering on that one, because I think that's a feeling we can all empathize with. Um, the projects that you're working with are really interesting because they allow you the space to continue to be the architect even after the building is finished, in some senses. You know, that you're part of the site, you're the developer, you're the initiator. Are these exemplary of the all of the kind of work that you do? Are you interested in that kind of work where you're the destination isn't even a finished building. It's a building that you then inhabit and that you're familiar with and that you know and all those sorts of things. I'm just interested in the form of practice that's evolving for you. Like, are you finding that these kinds of projects are less rare than I might have thought, that this kind of opportunity is more available than I might have otherwise thought?
Um, you always have to try in a way. And referring to that first foggy picture, you you always have the feeling that you don't know enough or you're not able to do something, and that's like a technique just to try. And so you don't think about it if something will go wrong, or if you really could do that, you just try to do it. And this is one thing, and the other one is that it's a lot of work also to have this contact to the clients that has to be very close, that you can do such things. And I always, well, I in a way I like to control everything. I'm a control freak, but I always know that I have to leave it. And that is a very interesting process to say, yeah, I have to leave it. And I just think about that from the beginning, that I have to leave parts to the client afterwards and that it's okay. And I have to build it in a way that that's possible. And then it's, well, I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
You are. I think you are. I think you are. It's interesting that it's control is how you describe it, because I agree that it's controlled, obviously incredibly controlled, and I mean that in the sense of skill. But the control that you're exercising is very different from the control of other types of architecture that are concerned only with their autonomous internal logic. You know, even in that, I'm not being negative on other architecture, you know, I'm not trying to be dismissive about it, but I was looking at that beautiful corner that you cut out of the barn in that first project. And it reminded me for 1 second about that project that Pascal Flammer did with the house and the open ground floor. And I'm not comparing the two, but I'm much more attracted to yours because it's much more ambiguous and it's something found as opposed to the full logical story of the project. And I'm not saying that to be negative about that other project. I'm comparing two ways of looking at the subject. And it's funny, I was emailing somebody yesterday. We were exchanging emails, and they're the dean in a very significant school of architecture. They've just been appointed as dean, and they had their meeting about it, and they were told that, well, you have all the responsibility but no control. And this question of control was what he was talking about. And I was commenting back to him, but do you want all the control? Because to have all the control would mean that you have to do everything yourself. And maybe the control that we're talking about is one of, you put on the music at the party, you control the furnishing in the room, but then the party and how it goes is not under your control. And in a sense, that sort of feels a little bit like the kind of control that you're talking about. It's about setting things in motion, but actually you're not seeking to describe a closed version of that control. It seems very expansive to me and feels very human. Sorry, I'm doing too much talking as well, guys. So people unmute and hop in and ask questions. Yeah, so I think that it's interesting because what you're saying is actually, I think, a very truthful story about how precise architecture has to be, but how enmeshed, how connected to the world we are, and therefore how we can't control everything. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Do you talk to me or to the? Oh, sorry.
At the moment of talking to you, I might be talking to myself. Well, I guess what I think is that, right, so let's just take that last project. You found the site, you recognized something in the site. There was all these problems with planning codes, that some of which you had to accept and some of which you were able to resist, but you weren't in control of what was that negotiation. Then there was a demolition that had to be controlled but was risky, and that was again subject to contingency. There was the decision to pair with a timber manufacturer, and again, that's somebody who comes with their world of control and their world of expertise. And so what I'm saying is the control that you're exercising is much more expansive than it is about shutting down. Do you know what I mean? It's much more about you being prepared to take the risk and understanding that you have the skill to land it no matter what happens. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, and yeah, you have to take the risk, and it could be okay if you fail. You have to consider that. But maybe it's like dancing. You never know if you fall because you are too drunk, for example. But
Yeah.
it takes maybe it uh it takes also you have to develop a good eye to see what is already there. Maybe this is the first thing.
Mhm.
For example, while dealing with existing buildings, these are all not precious buildings. They are not the nice ones. So you have to see the beauty in it if it's not a beauty, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
And this makes you free in a sense.
Yeah. It's funny, you're the second person. Well, we haven't done our podcast interview yet, Lilith, but in the chat that Kathy Hawley and I did, she said something very similar, where she said sometimes all you can say is point at something and say that it's beautiful. And that's a very exposing thing, because you're saying that you find something beautiful, and the cynical in the world might shut that down, and you're leaving yourself open to have that uh, confrontation. Um, but I think it's true, because it's such a gentle and profoundly generous way to lead somebody to somewhere new, because you're pointing at something that they have never seen before, that conventionally could be called ugly. You're describing it as beautiful. And what you're actually also doing is provoking in yourself a question. If they ask you, why is it beautiful, or how is it beautiful? And how do I understand this in the case of that last project, the yard, or these kinds of things? Um, Beauty provokes a question about understanding, whereas ugliness, or describing something as ugly, or describing those things, is only about shutting it down. And there's not really, nobody ever goes about how is it ugly, in what precise way is it ugly. Do you know what I mean? There's no opening up about that. And I think beauty, or that kind of attitude to beauty, about bringing things inside the tent that were sort of missed, is Well, really important now. Maybe it's always been very important, but it does feel very important now as we try and deal with so many things, in particular the climate crisis and learning to use what's around us and also learning to be the architects of the everyday, as you say, not special buildings. Special buildings, they can be special for the people that are connected with them, but ordinary at the same time. Anyway, I'm keeping told by Laura, who I teach with, that I need to stop talking for 3 minutes, and then people ask questions when you stop talking for 3 minutes. So I'm going to attempt this. Silence, I mean, which I'm not good at silence.
Hi, Lilith. I was going to ask.
Hi.
Jump in. I'm just interested to know when you're actually on site,
Yeah,
and building,
yeah,
how much you sort of adapt or kind of respond to things that are being constructed. You know, do you change much on site, or is it quite intuitive, or is it? I'm just interested because everything seems very precise and really, you know, very, Andrew said, very human, but it also seems very precise and absolutely well judged in advance. And the construction, and you're very, very trusting of your people who are manufacturing and building with you. But I just wonder how much when you're actually on site that you tweak or change or adapt or say, oh no, I'm not sure about that. Can we just move that, or I don't know. I'm intrigued.
it's both in the same time. In a way, that the first drawings I do, they are already almost there, what the end could be. And in the same time, I change a lot on site. One thing is because I'm not yet very experienced as an architect, and I have to, with every site, I learn a lot of things that I didn't know. And so the planning is also, we call it does this existing rolling planning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go on while you're already building. You're already on site, but in the same time you keep on planning. And there are a lot of things that happen on the site that I couldn't anticipate, and I have to change. And in the same way, I love it really to work together with those people. I would also like to go there and build it with my own hands, but they don't let me do that because I'm the architect. It's not possible. I'm the architect and I'm a woman. I should not carry something or do that. I have to accept that. But in a way, I would like to do that too. But I really like it to be on site and to see what is happening. And sometimes it's about small interventions, just how you fit a corner or something like that.
Yes.
Where I realized, oh, I didn't thought about it on my desktop.
Yes, and that's a wonderful opportunity, isn't it, to be able to have that discussion where things might be, if you've got, you know, if your contractor or your client is able to accommodate a slight shift or a change, for the better. That's fantastic opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not always possible. But there are different contractors and carpenters and all those people working on the site. Some of them are really great, and you could do a lot with them. and then there are people where you have to fight, and it's more difficult to get to a point, but like always.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jane. It's interesting though, because that's something that we talk about a lot in our practice too. And I don't know that it's possible to see the things on site unless you've tried before you've got to site, and then you've come up with a solution, and then you're on site and you realize it's something different, or the builder has made an error that you need to accept. But the effort that you put in before isn't wasted work, and I don't think it's based on a lack of experience. I think it's just tuning the brain to understand how to react. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's a sort of a project has a specific elasticity that you either don't, some architects are completely unaware of, and therefore these things are never picked up, and maybe that's okay. And other architects have a kind of an awareness of this stuff, and then they see the thing changing on site, and then they have to be very fast in response. But I think that speed is only possible because slow thinking happened some other time before about it. Do you know what I mean? And it's not talked about an awful lot, actually, because it's quite hard to describe that thing that you're talking about. The way that I try and come at it is that I observe that 100 years ago, a reasonably sized building might have required 6 drawings to build it. And today the same building might require 600, or at least over 100 drawings for the same complexity of building. And the difference is that in the absence of those drawings, there was the architect either directly on site or there through the agency of master builders or craftspeople who were acting as design intelligence on site. And so that intelligence existed in human form, and due to contemporary contractual situations, it has to somehow exist in drawn form. But the intelligence is still in the brains of the people on the site, and the drawings are just a way to explain the currency. Do you know what I mean? That's it. Like in some senses, that architect is still there on site, that those brains are still thinking. And as you say, there's craftspeople on site caring or not caring. And all paths,
yeah. And well, I'm building in small villages with small contracting firms, and some of them they are even not really able to read my plans. So the plans are in a way for me to understand what I want to do. But then I have to explain it with words or simple sketches, or saying make it like this.
It's interesting. Ava Prats was talking how and actually I think they do it in their project as well, but in Mariah's project, the drawings were all one line weight, those famous Mariah's drawings. And the drawings that were published afterwards were slightly cleaned up, but the drawings on site were exactly that way. And she said that they are confusing. I mean, I remember as a student seeing them and not knowing what was the roof and what was the floor. There's no dotted lines. They're all solid lines. They're all the same line weight. And she explained that, yes, you couldn't read those drawings. You needed someone to point at a line and say, that's the roof above, that's the slope in the floor. And so the drawing was a way of explaining how vital the architect was. And so her job on Igualada Cemetery was to interpret the drawings for the drawings that she had made, deliberately difficult to read, that she was there interpreting and reading them back for the builder. So her expertise was established at 21 dealing with these contractors on a huge cemetery project. And I find that really interesting. I mean, I would. Sorry, do we have other questions for Lilith? I'm conscious I'm wandering on again. I just can't do this 3-minute thing. There's Bruno.
Oh, hi, hello.
Hi.
I'm going to try to add something to the discussion. Lily, thank you very much for your presentation. It was absolutely beautiful work. The question I wanted to ask was that I'm going to try to make it clear. So I think there is a clear balance, but also tension between something very precise and very clear for us to understand the structure of the projects, and something very intuitive, as for example the use of color, which I found rather incredibly well judged. But then there are these intriguing images that you presented of Francesca Woodman, Sasha Weidner, and I think it would be useful for our students to understand whether those images, those photographs, the works of art, are for you a way of explaining the project or a way of developing the project. So at what point in the process those images become productive or informative to you?
These are images that are like very much for years. For example, the ones of Francesca Woodman, but they are not references. Now they are here to explain the project, because while I'm developing a project, I'm not able to speak about it. It's very difficult for me. In my head, it's like it's like being in a dark room. I would not be able to explain it. And it's just when it's finished, I slowly can start to explain it. What have I done? And suddenly it makes sense, or I suddenly see, this green color. Well, I saw it in the house on the other side of the road, but I didn't realize it when I was developing the idea of that color. It's very not confusing, but I can draw it, but I cannot talk about it. And the clearness or the structure is also a kind of how do you call it, craftsmanship. It's like a language, a visual language. I also learned about proportions and all those things, and rhythm, and it's like a language you can speak in drawing, for example, or in planning, instead of words. Yeah.
So, how was college for you, Lilith, where every week you have to explain and all of this? Did you enjoy that, or did you just?
I enjoyed the part what I heard and what I saw and what I learned, but talking about it was not easy.
Yeah.
I think somebody said that listening to my presentation was like dying because it was so boring.
Well, I hope I'm a long way off it yet, but I'm not sure that dying is boring. But anyway, I think that's something else. Yeah, I'm saying that actually for the benefit of students who sometimes find it hard to articulate what they're doing. It's okay just to show us things that are beautiful, and that's enough, isn't it? And you don't have to always know why.
Well, it's a good training. It's a good training to realize what you are doing, but there are people who are very gifted and can do that easily, and others are not.
Yeah, yeah. Jane, you're back.
No, I'm just
You're just
because I
being
realise we're all, it's being in the room really, but
I know, yeah. The little grey boxes are
yeah.
sometimes a little bit disconcerting, aren't they?
Are the people here who you talked about somebody using a reference or something like that?
Well, I know Alex Gore, who runs, I think it was his unit that I saw it in. It was one of his students had done a precedent study of the apartment building that you showed us at the end. Alex, is that right? That was one of your students I saw, the precedent?
It could well have been, and it wasn't a specific precedent, but I think you're right in that a student may have gone off on a bit of a tangent and found it. Yes.
Yeah. I was due to be critting Alex's students yesterday, but my children disagreed quite violently.
You can issue an IOU again, Andrew.
Yes, I will, Alex. I will. I mean, it's interesting, Lilith, because you talk so well about the work, and the work is so incredibly beautiful, and yet it's hard to find out information about the work without inviting you into the school to show us about the work. And I'm curious. I do hope there's somebody offering to make a book about some of these projects or publish some of these projects. I do hope there might be.
There is a book already.
Is a book. Oh, yeah. I don't have the book then. I'm going to have to go out and buy the book. So I didn't really know there was a book. Who did the book?
Quart.
Okay. My apologies. So I don't have the book. That's my fault.
I can send one to you.
I'll buy it. I'll buy it. What we might do is, unless there are questions, are there questions? Unless there are questions, we might let Lilith get back to her evening in Switzerland and hours to hours here. I don't think there is. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Lilith, for an incredibly beautiful lecture, which is very memorable, I think, for us all. And join us in 2 weeks' time for Leslie Loco's lecture, a week after that for Mary Duggan's lecture, and a week after that for Kate Goodwin's lecture. So it's a nice run of architects, educators and curators taking us up to the Easter break. So thank you so much all. And maybe we unmute and say thank you to Lilith. And
thank you, Lilith.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.